Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to the International Conference of Aesthetics Commit. So, I present my paper, New Germs of Genius LOCI, the sensitive foundation of the aesthetics forms of living. The Latin word sensus means sensibility, feeling, sensation, judgment. At the same time, sensus is the foundation of the aesthetic theories. Through this meaning, we would retrace the fundamental characteristics of architecture. We would analyze also the role of the relation between the architecture and the philosophical thought. In the 1954, the Italian philosopher Enzo Paci focused on the concept of city. How are communities born? How is city born? Taking up the words of Giambattista Vico, Inge and Silva, the urban space is the one that stands out from the pleasant one. We should refer to Hegel, who expressed, through the concept of symbolic, the absolute role of architectures that refers in all its forms to the spirit, the ultimate and highest meaning of existence. The history of man takes place parallel to an architectural history, where the sensus of both is found in their mutual relationship. In this regard, with the aim of identifying with one's own lived space, the community as well as the individual, they need a structural balance that is of an aesthetic harmony suggested by the architectural construction itself. The polis, as well in the pyramids, stand up as symbols of a reference from a historical point of view, but also for the dense theoretical meanings that sublimate. In this case, the meaning of living represents a wide range of social experiences that are repeated over time in different ways. Currently, and especially after the postmodern crisis, the living models have changed considerably, and so has the relationship between time and space. With the advent of the virtual and discontinuous, the social and aesthetic roles that cover architecture has been loaded with even more dense and interreacted meanings. Whereas, in ancient times, the primordial characters of the shelters and of Genius LOCI represented the fundamental symbols of protection. In the contemporary epoch, they became identifying reference points. For example, the new nomads are slowly regaining their origins, and they making their roots no longer a distant memory, but an enrichment of the present. In this paper, we would like to illustrate the importance of sensitive experience in the context of living. We will show how a sensitive way of living it is at the antipodes of every architectural form through the following points. 1. The primordial and etymological context. 2. The aesthetic living experience. 3. The consolidation of the feeling experience as an aesthetic way of living. 4. For an everyday aesthetics theory of living. First point, the primordial and etymological context. Through the concept of primordial refuge and sensitive experience, we can consider the concept of living an original phenomenon expression of Goethe to determine the constitution of daily experience. The necessity of the refuge indicates that the humanity conforms space in an habitat space. Thus, Vitruvius derives the birth of architecture parallel to that of language, from observing the customs of the primitive people contemporary to him that is seeking for confirmation in ethnology. The second book of De Architectura contains the famous exhibition on the origin of architecture, in which Vitruvius recalls a primitive world in which man discovers fire and builds the first wooden shelter, giving life to the myth of the Primordian youth, and of the column wooden as the origin of the Doric temple and of all the architectural forms. In an etymological context, we found the source of the word living from the Latin habere. Living could assume the connotation of the possession of space. The moment we are, at the same time, we possess our space, which surrounds us only by experience it. Living is the very essence of existence. the rooting of life in everyday reality. Georges Perec says, living in a room, what is it? To inhabit a place, does it mean to take possession of it? What does it mean to take possession of a place? From when does a place really becomes yours? Therefore, the primordial concept of living is based on the nature of being. Hence, the housing model is related to the possession and shelter futures. Second point, the aesthetic living experience. By this point, we will see how the aesthetic experience is present in the context of living. First of all, living is presented as an aesthetic experience starting from the body, that is, the living way is established through the feelings. The living space is organized on the basis of tenacious geometries. Thus, constant reference point is the human body. The mythical nature of anthropomorphism as dissolved in anthropometry based on the theory of proportion. For Aristotle, the space has a double determination. On one hand, it is a common aspect in which all the bodies are. On the other is that particular determination in which a body exists now. Aristotle says, the existence of place is held to obvious from the fact of mutual replacement. Where water now is, there in turn, when the water has gone out, as from a vessel air is present. Therefore, where another body occupies this same place, the place is thought to be different from all the bodies which come to be in it and replace one another. What now contains air formerly contained water, so that clearly the place or space into which and out of which they passed was something different from both. Historically, the concept of body has developed through the concept of centrality. The human body has definitely imposed itself in design of the architectural space at the moment when Vitruvius turns into his treatise. The Vitruvian canon refers to the architecture of the temple, apogee of the design of space. Its epistemological characteristics make it universal and applicable to every construction. The Homo bene figuratus assumes a unit of measurement of the architectural space and of the structures that organize it. In this way, the theory of proportions overcomes the direct imitation of the human body. Beauty does not lie in the individual elements but in the harmonious proportion of the parts, says Vitruvius. In the same time, in the German Romanticism, living was for Romantics the fulfillment of a process of intimate adherence to the world. To inhabit the space for the Romantics also means reuniting with the universe, and this we perceive the echo of the archaic cult of the omphalos, of the navel on the world. Concepts such as axis mundi and genius loci are affirmed within a new wave of conceiving the belonging to the living and cosmic space. Romanticism makes the concept of living the center of a cosmic reflection where poetic living prevails over the awareness of the self, making that of living a complex concept. Living, in this way, assumes its centrality starting from a cosmic vision of the house, where the space of the house takes on the connotation of a cosmic reality. Indeed, wandering in the world becomes a central point of the being in the world. Benjamin's flaneur, like the contemporary nomad, starts from the primary concept of the world as a territory where the ancient sense of the rootedness remains anchored to the concept of subjective intimacy. Third point, the consolidation of the feeling experience as an aesthetic way of living. The original meaning of the term to dwell suggests the sense of remaining in a place. Martin Heidegger addressed dwelling as the way in which a man is able to stay in the world, Dasein. Accordingly, with the existential condition in Heidegger theories, it is clear that the individual during his evolutionary process needs to select, define, and characterize some of the space that surrounds him. In the context of an aesthetic way of living, we are free from the beauty's classic dogma, and we revive ourselves through the relationship with the living space and object. We are instinctively predisposed to feel the place and our belong to them. But what happens in the contemporary area and in the community of new nomads? How they perceive the world, and how the characteristics of new models of inhabited embodied? In the age of immigration, international movements of the population in the modern world, Harry illustrates the dynamic of a nomadism that requires a continuous development of one's nomad identity along with the constant reappropriation of one's original space. Therefore, this is an issue primarily concerning the discovery of nomads' own origin at every step. This erratic way of life raises complex issues concerning the relationship between identities, both individual and collective, and their environment, as well as between the inhabited and feasible confirmation of the space. In this context, Gaston Bachelard's philosophy helps us to understand how models of spatial identity come from the individual relation to the world around him. Bachelard illustrates in the Poetics of the Space the archetype of the house is the place where our soul is composed as a three-story house. It develops vertically, where every floor will be suitable for every reason of our life. In the same time, the primigenial space, the primordial space of refuge, becomes the absolute of living that accompanies us in our becoming. According to Gaston Bachelard, our relationship with the space starts to develop through our intimate experience with the four natural elements. Further, even if the water is often mentioned in Bachelard writings, the elements most related to the sense of the dwelling is the earth. The poetic image of the shelter recalls a protective Mother Earth that provides us an asylum. Therefore, dwelling implies a return to the home, to the birthplace, to the shelter, stricto sensu, that settles down every time with different use and taste as a consequence of the contemporary nomadic lifestyle. The cave and the womb are therefore both images of an interior space deriving the oikos that is the origin from which depends our primary relationship with the world. A fourth point for an everyday aesthetics theory of living. In this panorama, the appropriation of a living experience is the starting point to define our aesthetic way of living. For this reason, we want to introduce the concept of the everyday into our aesthetics of living. There are just a few exponents of the everyday aesthetics, like Yuriko Saito and Thomas Leddy, who have emphasized the routine aspect as a form of expressionality, and we will see in a moment how the aesthetic experience of the everyday can be reconciled with the living way. To induce the relationship between aesthetics and everyday life, it is the acquisition of the concept of experience through the theories of John Dewey that contrast the philosophy of the art of his time with a type of museum and elite conception. Dewey aims to restore the continuity between a refined experience and the events that constitute the daily experience. Starting from his essay, Art as Experience, Dewey emphasized the relationship between the human being and the environment that surrounds it. Daily aesthetic practice must possess the main characteristics of repetition, offering the aesthetics of existing outside the conventional form of artistic expression. There are the activities of the routine that constitute everyday life. In this case, of everyday aesthetics, attention shifts only the action of everyday life. So, in conclusion, From the aesthetic experience of living, we want to finally hold the sensitive foundation to recreate our disposition to an infinity of an inner identity, born only through our experience of daily living. Thus, the feeling experience is the answer, finally, for a new theory of inhabitation. Thank you so much.